Hello and welcome to this special bonus episode of The Dairy Edge. Teagasc are running a weekly Let's Talk Dairy webinar series, which is also being made available as a podcast. On this week's webinar, Head of Dairy KT, Joe Patton, joins Stuart Childs to discuss the concept of system drift in dairy farming in Ireland and how people can avoid it.
Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to this Thursday's Let's Talk Dairy. So today, I suppose, following on from the Open Day a couple of weeks ago and also dovetailing on to what we were talking about last week in relation to the nitrogen excretion bans and maybe how that could impact on some farms. There's been a bit of talk about system drift and basically we're probably just going to define what system drift is and I suppose just to put it into context for people, we want to clarify exactly what it is because there's a bit of it, from my experience anyway, there was a little bit of questioning coming after the Open Day as to whether people were being considered as having their system drifting already or not. So I suppose just to put it in to frame the outline of what we're talking about today, since quotas went in 2015, there's been a significant increase in production at farm level, obviously, and also an increase in profitability because, of course, people are no longer hamstrung or not farming with a hand tied behind their back, as we used to describe the quota scenario, because they are able to let cows operate to their potential generally, or can try to operate to their potential as much as possible without the worry of running over and having fines and so forth attached to it. However, I suppose there's a tipping point. All of what we've done and there's often criticism of us in the organisation that we're very grass focused, but there's a reason we're very grass focused, and the reason is it's the cheapest source of feed that we can provide to all stock, dairy cows or beef cattle or sheep or anything in the country. And where we get that right, we can have high profitability and still achieve good output. In years like this, where there's a very good solid milk price and you're looking probably at something that's going to average out maybe 36, 37 cent a litre maybe for the year, which is obviously a very solid base price to work off of. The temptation is there to push to get that extra milk out. I suppose the only thing in a year like this is that feed prices have drifted up as well. So the margin that sometimes can be achieved when milk prices are good may not be as good. And I suppose as we move, as I said, talking about the nitrogen excretion issue last week, there are farms that are going to come under pressure from a stocking rate point of view. And the temptation is maybe to, as I said last week, is to try to hold what you have and find a way of keeping that. But in reality, there may be a possibility that coming back might be the best way forward, if that makes sense. So I've asked Joe to come on and talk about it because himself and Padraig French were talking at the Open Day on this topic. I suppose it's important that we clarify the situation around the system drift and, as I said, help people to try and avoid drifting into that scenario is really the reason that we're talking about this today. So it's basically going back to the fundamentals of good dairy farming in Ireland. And it may annoy some people, but that is based on grass. And no matter how many people are on the call or on the webinar today, there's no one on this webinar today that isn't utilising a certain proportion of grass. And we're not stopping people from expanding, but we're suggesting that expansion has to come from grass-based rather than other inputs. So Joe, you've a bit of a presentation there that, as we were discussing earlier in the year or earlier in the week, is something that you'd put a lot of work into a good few years ago and was kind of hidden in the depths of your computer. So the fundamentals haven't changed really.
Are you saying I'm just recycling old stuff, Stuart?
No, yeah. I'm saying that you've good work done, Joe, but you're bringing it out again.
Yeah, look, so thanks for the invite this morning anyway. But yeah, look, it was definitely an interesting thing standing at the board for a couple of days or 3 days in the Open Day in Moore Park, and we talked quite a bit about, sort of where the current levels of performance are on farms and maybe where the targets are. And I suppose at the time, and it's quite difficult, I suppose we were at pains to say that the targets we had on the board, they have to be taken in the round really, because I think it's dangerous at times when people sort of take one target and run with one target only. Like, so for the big one, I think, around and it caused some questions and maybe some issues after the thing, was around stocking rate. Actually, like stocking rates, maybe up to 65, 2.65, 2.7 up at that level. But on the day we had to try and really make the case that, or make the point that that's very much contingent on where grass growth is. And the idea that it's a misrepresentation. Maybe we didn't do ourselves any favors on it, but it's a misrepresentation of what we'd be saying to say that we're saying everyone should be stocked at 2.65 feed and a half ton of concentrate, and that's it, because that's hugely dependent on growth rate, and on what growth rates would be. So the focus would be, we're really saying is, unless you have the growth rate in place, really you don't have any business trying to push to those stock rates. And the problems I think it's happening, and where system drift comes in, is that it's probably easier to put the cows on and get up to that stocking rate. Then it's easier to do the cow side of it than the supply side of it. So we can all increase demand very easily by just loading on more cows. And I think there's a few things that's happening there at farm level. I do think maybe that, as fertility has got better, and maybe as parlour sizes got bigger, if a lot of people may be milking at 20 units plus now, an extra 20 cows is seen as another 10 minutes milking, when it used to be seen as an extra half an hour milking. And so it's easy for a lot of people to carry a few extra cows, but that does have quite a margin effect at the margin. So when we talk about system drift, I suppose really, I suppose we could look at it another way and say, really what we're trying to say is people should just be careful not to sort of drift into too high a stocking rate for the grass that they're growing, I suppose. And that's the main point we wanted to get across. But of course, I suppose some people took that as, Teagasc are saying everyone should be stocked at 2.65, which is certainly not what we're saying. I would say, you can come back yourself. You've been at a lot of groups over the years in your neck of the woods, and you tell me that where people are at in terms of growth rate, it's probably somewhere around 13 to 14 tons, I would have thought, on good commercial farms. That translates into a stocking rate of maybe 2.3, 2.4 old farm is where it's at, It's definitely not up where we're talking. So that's a bit of clarity that's needed. So maybe do you want to just take a look at some stuff, and we just see what system drift could look like, I suppose. And that's maybe we'll take a quick run through that and see, does it shine any light on maybe what we were talking about. So I might just share what you're talking about there and see where we get with that, right? So are we up? Yeah.
Yeah, just go to the full screen there. That's all.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So look, it's back to this idea, that one size doesn't fit all, and that's the problem, that we cannot say that the optimal stocking rate is 2.6, 2.7 without mentioning what the supply is. And unfortunately, the reality is that there aren't enough people out there that know what their supply is. I suppose what we do, we tend to measure it by what's missing out of the system. We tend to measure forage supply. We don't measure what's grown in a lot of cases. What we end up doing is buying the silage or renting the ground to make up the difference, rather than measuring what we have. And that's where the problems, I suppose, start to come in, because we start pushing, pushing more cows onto an area that's not fit to carry them, and that's the drift into that type of system. I suppose we just want to be careful on. So one size doesn't really fit all, and we were very much saying that the last day that 5.5 tons is what you need to be growing per cow in order to sustain the system within the farm, within the boundaries of the farm. So if you're growing 11 tons, for example, you can carry 2 cows per hectare. If you're growing 14 tons, you'll probably be able to carry something close to 2.5. You certainly won't be carrying up to 2.7 unless you're growing up to 15.5 tons, which is a big ask technically now. There's no point in saying otherwise. It's a big ask. It's a research target, I suppose. Some farms are doing it, but it's quite hard to replicate that year on year. But look, people are increasing in their grass production for sure, but that higher level is difficult to sustain over time. So look, I suppose when we talk about herd demand, there's lots of things in here. And I suppose when we talk about systems, Stuart, and system drift, everybody, you can argue in a lot of these things, is it a system at all, or is it just a component of the farms? Because it seems to me, talking to farms over the years, that there seems to be 17,000 dairy farms in the country and 17,000 opinions and systems. That's the reality. So look, at all these things obviously will feed into demand. Your calving pattern, your lactation length, obviously your live weight of your cows, your culling policy, whether you cull your cows earlier, whether you finish them on farm, all those things will affect your demand. What affects your supply? Obviously, it's your grace in hectares and your growth rate are the big ones. Your growth rate and growth pattern, those are the ones that's going to affect supply. So really, when we talk about you mentioned about, we're pushing very much about a pasture-based system. Really, when we talk about system drift, to me, I suppose if we end up drifting away from the idea of matching supply and demand within the farm, that's where we start running into, that's where things start to get marginal in terms of the return, right? So look
just before you go on there, go back to that previous slide there.
Yeah.
Where you have the external block hectare now, and you've said about the 2.7 stocking rate, just clarify that, we'll say, because most farms, that's probably can be a bit of the nobody issue as well, is that the vast majority of farms in Ireland have an outside block, and
absolutely,
how do they utilise it best, like?
And we fully take that point. Like we're all living in the real world here, that people will have an external block, Stuart. So look, where are people at in terms of, the external block becomes a big issue, I suppose. Look, the thing there is that when we talk about sort of sustaining the herd, that's, if, replacements plus cows, plus dry cow feed, etc. Generally speaking, whole farm stocking rate is what you're looking at there. And whole farm stocking rate of about, at that level of growth rate across the farm is generally going to be, for that 14 tons growing, is about somewhere around 2.3 to 2.4 whole farm, right? And for a lot of people, that might mean something around 3 cows to the hectare, or 3.1 cows to the hectare, maybe on grazing, back to 2.4 whole farm. That's kind of where, seems to be where the sweet spot is kind of is. But I suppose the issue becomes then, what if there's more outside block available? That we start pushing on to 4 cows per hectare, 5 cows per hectare, 6 cows per hectare. And that's, that's where things start getting a bit tricky. But I'd always look at that and say, really, that ultimately, if you look at it, at that level of growth rate, 3 cows per hectare is probably what you can sustain sort of for 6.5 months a year on grass. And everything after that is pretty much, you should really be doing your sums on the basis of an indoor cow, right? And that's the key. That's the funny, like we're hiding an indoor system in the middle of a grazing system. So for example, and we've looked at this on a few farms over the years, if you're stocked at 6 cows per hectare, for example, you've basically got a 3 cow per hectare grazing system, and then you've got the equivalent of 3 cows per hectare that may as well be standing in the shed every day of the year. And they should be costed as such. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So, even though they're out by day and in by night, all those things become tactical, I suppose. But when you add up the feed cost over the whole thing, it's basically a grazing system with an indoor system sort of mixed in the middle of it. So oftentimes that complicates the management at farm level, because it makes it harder to get paddocks grazed out. It makes, there's obviously issues with heavy stocking rates on paddocks, and moving cows pre and post milking, and all those things come into it. So sometimes you wonder, like, that you get to a point where, get to a certain point in stocking rate where really you should just be basically saying that I effectively now have an indoor system. And if that's your choice, that's your choice, But we can't be kidding ourselves saying that, I'm stocked at 7 cows to the grazing hectare. Really, there's probably 4 cows to the hectare of that may as well be in the shed all year. And that's from a feed budget point of view. Okay, that's the point. And that is a difficult one, and that's why we do need to look at this probably case by case. But it's a concept, I suppose, we're trying to work with people to sort of try and put the numbers on that as best we can. So, I'll just skip a wee bit there, because I know we're not going to have a huge amount of time this morning, but I just wanted to skip to something that, if you look here, this is maybe tells me something about what we're talking about. That's milk and platform stocking rate versus feed cost per litre at farm level, right? That's from Profit Monitor data. Now, you would expect, wouldn't you? You would expect from research that your that milk and platform stocking rate and feed cost per litre would be very tightly linked, right? But really, what we see at farm level is that feed cost per litre, or purchase feed cost per litre, as defined, is a bit all over the place as it relates to stocking rate. And that's because we have a whole variation of things going on. There's a variation in how much grass is being grown. There's variation on how much grass is being grown on the outblocks. There's variation on how much concentrate is being fed per cow. And there are a lot of farms out there that feed concentrate on a per cow basis rather than on a they feed it, obviously they're going to feed it on a per cow basis, but they're going to be feeding X level of concentrate almost irrespective of the stock. You know what I mean? You can see farms there that are at 2 cows per hectare, maybe milk and platform stocking rate, spending 6 and 7 cent, 8 cent a litre on purchased concentrate. Those are the type of farms who probably feed 7 kilos of concentrate all spring, because that's always what happens. And then you have some people stocked at the same stocking rate that are feeding maybe 2.5, 3 cent a litre of concentrate costs. So there's a massive variation in and around that. And I suppose, look, we don't want to, we have to be careful. We don't want to be, we're really, it's not our job to be sort of, be hammering at people or preaching at people. But all we're trying to say is here that, there are indicators within the data of what we can see actually drives profitability. And I suppose what we want to try and do is marry what people want to do in terms of their own approach with their own system, and try and see how much of that, what is that contributing to profit relative to where it could be, I suppose. And you would be saying that, if you look at, for example, farms that are at 2 cows to the hectare feeding 8 cent a litre on feed costs, there aren't that many of them in the data set. But our objective, let's say, for those farms is to try and maybe say, okay, do you need to be feeding that level of concentrate for that level of stocking rate? Can you do something on your grass growth that you can sustain more of your milk production from your own grass resources? When you get up to here and up to 4.5, 5 cows per hectare, maybe the discussion for those type of farms is, is it paying you on a hectare basis to be bringing in the extra feed? And then you look here, maybe at a cow to the acre type stocking rate, and you're saying, well, look at some of the farms down here, they might be underfeeding their cows actually relative to what they're growing. So there's a range of issues across all that spectrum that makes it very difficult for anybody to walk away saying, well, there's a single solution sort of for everybody. But so really, if you look at it, farms here, they need to look at why are they feeding so much at a low stocking rate. Some of the farms down here, you'd have to look at how much milk they're producing per cow. Are they underfeeding cows maybe perhaps at certain times of the year? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, depending on the growth rates. And up here, that maybe the sustainability of the stocking rates might be the issue. So there's a range of issues out there that we all gets wrapped up in this notion of system, I suppose. And what we don't want to happen is that people say, well, that's my system and that's it, and therefore the conversation ends. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So there's a lot to think about there.
Yeah, so I suppose, Joe, just for people maybe that aren't familiar with the graph that you have there, like that R square that's there, if there was a good relationship between the stocking rate and the feed cost, that line would be up at an angle, basically 45.
Yeah, that should be, that you could read that as saying that's basically 2% of the difference on the farm of feed costs is down to stocking rate. So the relationship between feed costs and stocking rate at the farm level is very weak, but it should be very strong. If you think about it, at research level, you'd expect it to be very strong, because you'd say that as I increase my stocking rate, you'd expect as you increase your stocking rate, you would expect your feed costs to go up. But the issue at farm level is, Stuart, there's such a variation in grass growth, there's such a variation in people's approach to feeding concentrate, there's such a variation in cow type, that all of those issues cloud the relationship between stocking rate and feed costs. Whereas at a research level, like if you take it was in, say, Curtains or in Ballyhaise or in Solihull or wherever, you basically start off with the same cow, the same grass growth rate, and then you change the stocking rate, and what happens? Feed cost changes. You get me? Whereas here, it's all the variation at farm level hides the effect of stocking rate on feed cost. And really what we're interested in is, can we help farmers, each of those individual dots there is a farm, so can we help farmers improve their efficiency and move the dial that, that the stocking rate is appropriate for the grass they're growing, and that the feed cost is appropriate for the stocking rate they're at. That's all we're really trying to do here. We're not trying to box people in to this is a good system and this is a bad system. We're really trying to say is, look, can we bring stocking rate, cow performance and feed cost together and put a bit of extra margin on the farms that we're looking. That's what we're trying to do. Now, you mentioned about why we're stuck with the grass thing. I suppose the reason that we go after the grass part of it is that when we look at it on a per hectare basis, and you mentioned the line being a bit straighter, that's the line there for how much grass we're grazing per hectare versus net profit per hectare. And that relationship, depending on the year, is anywhere between sort of 50 and 60%. In this data set, it's a bit lower, but generally speaking, it explains half to 2/3 of the variation in profit is down to how much grass you can graze per hectare, right? That's why we go after it. And that's why we want to try to get people to say, okay, can I grow a bit more grass? Can I get cows to eat a bit more of it? Can I can I manage my stocking rate and my feed inputs in order that the herd produces more from our grass resource? And if we do that, we get more profit per hectare out. Okay, so that's the relationship between grass eaten and profit is very strong. But as I say, it's kind of clouded by the fact that you've all this noise happening at farm level, which is, it's understandable. You've got 17,000 managers on the block there, rather than just one running a trial. That's and 17,000 individual circumstances as well to be looked at, you know. All right. Look, I just move it on, Stuart, and I'll just give an idea. Like, we were looking at the question, I suppose you're coming at is really what happens when you have reached the point where you're sort of sitting at a cow to the acre and you're saying, well, where do we go from here? I suppose that's an issue that happens, and maybe that's where the drift sort of comes into, right? And maybe that's one thing we're going to look at. So I'll just throw up a quick case study here for a second, and that'll maybe hopefully help us to have something, throw a bit of light on that. So we're just looking at just a bit of a case study we looked at a couple of years ago about the idea here is like a farm that's kind of sitting at average enough performance. What are they going to do different over the next couple of years? Will they change stocking rate? Will they improve? What's the value of getting bigger or versus getting better, or both? I suppose that's the question. So just bear with us for a second. They're saying, look, let's just take this as an example farm, right? So 45 hectares with 15 hectares of an outblock, right? Milking 100 cows, 413 kilos of milk solids, grazing stocking rate 2.22, very close to where you might say the average farm is. The Dairygold average is not that different to this, right? So look at more or less where we're at. Meal is kind of 3/4 of a ton, pretty standard, growing about 12 tons. That's your setup, right? That's where you're at. Okay. So so you can see your feed budget, your grazing, your grass, you've got your 1.3 tons of silage being eaten over the year and 3/4 of a ton of meal. We all know farms like that. Okay. So, and that's your production, how your sort of standard seasonal production, obviously, with your summer, with good production over the summer and tapering off, obviously, at the edges, right? So how does that look? Your grazing platform basically is pretty okay. You've got you're grazing all your grass, you're making some silage at home, you're feeding some silage, but a third of your silage is going to milking cows, 2/3 of your silage is going to dry cows. There's your 3/4 of a ton of meal, and your outblock is pretty much in balance as well, right? That's the system. So you're sort of quite self-sufficient. So I suppose when you talk about drift and where are you going to go? So the question are, I'm going to stay as I am and milk 100 cows, but feed a bit more concentrate. I'm going to maybe improve the solids by breeding and maybe improve a bit on grass quality. And maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the stocking rate and buy a bit of maize because I'm going to buy silage, maybe buy maize, maybe rent a bit of land and push on, but the cows are going to stay the same essentially. Or I'm going to try and push my grass growth, increase my solids and jack up my stocking rate, but on the back of extra grass growth rather than on the back of extra silage bought, right? So I think that's a fair representation of maybe where fellas might be at or where people might be at in terms of what they're thinking. So I am where I am. How am I going to maybe milk a few extra cows, 20 extra cows? Will I do it by buying silage? Will I do it by growing more grass? Will I stay as I am and just try and knock a bit more out of the cows that I have, right? So that's the system. So look, what does that mean? There's a range of things here. So remember, this is kind of 100 cows. Maybe will I push on to get the extra meal, or you have your series of buy and feed options, or you have your sort of your improved grass growth. You can remember those things. We'll just come to what we got on those in a second, right? So, and we. On that also, what we would have said is, look, if you're carrying from 100 to 125 cows, you're going to have to obviously put the facilities in place. So in the expansion scenarios, you're going to have to cover, you're going to have to pay a bit of extra labor, put in the facilities, cover the extra overhead. So there's not just the feed budget cost, but there's also the marginal cost of carrying the extra 25 cows at least for the time you're paying for the extra facilities, right? So that has to be accounted for as well. So look at when you add all that up, right, Stuart, I'm sorry for rushing through this quickly, but I just wanted to try and get on to the sort of the outcome of all this. So look at the baseline is stage R, and these are all cash margins. This is kind of cash margin per hectare at 30 cent a litre. What will happen at 30 cent a litre? So this is kind of meal cost at 240 a tonne or 280 a tonne, right? And over here is if you're debt free. So let's say in 10 years time, when you're finished paying for the extra facilities, etc. If you're debt free, how will it look after a while? Because people often ask that question. Sure, if once I'm finished paying for the facilities, I'll have the extra cows to milk. Okay, higher meal, just feeding the extra meal at 30 cent a litre, given the level of expected response, pretty much you might make 50 quid a hectare more at 240 euros a tonne. You pretty much break even at 280, right? So that's at 30 cent a litre. So really saying the higher concentrate, it'll not put a huge addition in margin. However, if you take your 413 kilos of solids cow and improve the breeding on the grassland and improve the production of the cows through better cows and better grass, the difference in margin per hectare could be up to 500 euros, okay, by concentrating on better breeding and grass. If I decide, you know what, I'm going to jack up the stocking rate and buy in silage, and I've taken silage here, meaning 68, 67, 68 DMD silage, because that's what's available to buy on the country. I don't see really high quality stuff being bought too often. If you're doing extra, just buying in silage, while you're paying for the shed, basically, you'll be down 100, 150 euros a hectare. Okay? When the shed's finished paid for and the facilities are finished paid for, the margin is just about break even, I would say. Similar with maize. With maize, maybe the loss at the while you're paying for the shed is a bit less, with a bit more of a margin in it because the quality of feed that you're buying is better. You have a huge number of assumptions behind this in terms of costs of all these forages, but the general thrust of this is if I'm pushing up cow numbers and not improving my grass growth and relying just on bought-in silage to increase my profit, at 30 cent a litre, buying it at sort of standard enough meal prices, you're basically saying that there's no margin in it, and even when you've shed finished paid for, the margin is still small. Renting extra land and doing it all yourself, rather than buying it on the stem, depending on where you're at, depending on what the quality of that land is and all other things, there may not be a huge margin in that either. Whereas if you were talking about improving your grass production, getting your solids up closer to 460 a cow, you're basically holding your concentrate as best you can, maybe feeding a bit extra, but not a huge amount extra, but really driving it on better grass growth and better cow type. The marginal benefit is up to 500 euros a hectare, but when you're debt free, it's up to 700 euros a hectare extra profit, right? So really, if what I'm trying to show there is, Stuart, and I hope this is not that I haven't missed the point here, but I suppose what are we really saying here? That's staying as you are. This is just driving it by extra meal, and the margin is relatively small. Doing it, staying as you are, but improving your cows from where the dairy gold averages at the moment, there could be 400 or 500 euros a hectare benefit in that, and it comes without a capital cost. If I carry the extra cows and just go out and buy moderate quality silage, I'm probably going to be down slightly in margin while I'm paying for my facilities. It'll break even once the facilities are paid for. Similarly with maize, or similarly with renting moderate quality land. However, if I focus on improving my cows, improving my grass growth, and doing that from within our own resources, you'll probably make an extra 400 euros per hectare profit while you're paying for your extra facilities, and up to 700 euros extra profit per hectare once the sheds are paid for. Okay, obviously at 26 cent a litre, there's a lot more negatives on the board, and nothing really makes a whole lot of sense except for improving your quality of cow. And obviously at 34 cent a litre, the margins are quite strong for the improved performance. But even at 34 cent a litre, buying moderate quality silage on the stem and bringing it in to carry a few extra cows is marginal enough. So that's to me, that's an interesting enough way of looking at it. That really, if milk price is high, the reward for technical improvement is greater, rather than if milk price is high, the reward for extra cows is greater. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
So look, that's so when we talk about system drift, I suppose what we're trying to say is to people, do your sums on it. Like someone else can sit down and do these sums and they'll come up with a different set of figures than me or something similar. But what I'm just saying is, do the sums on the extra cows, and if it pays to bring them on for how you're doing it, then you can look at it again. But the one thing we don't want people doing is just renting the extra ground for silage, or just carrying the extra 20 cows, or whatever it is, just for the sake of the extra 20 cows. And that's system drift in a nutshell, really.
Yeah, and the other thing, I suppose, Joe, as I said, dovetailing from what we spoke about last week on the excretion band rates and so forth.
Yeah.
The labour element of bringing on extra land or bringing in extra facilities, and my God, there's just even greater pressure than there was before in terms of labour coming now. People really do. I suppose that was done in the context of purely just thinking about the future of your farm from an actual physical cow numbers and how your farm was performing. But now when you marry that to the whole potential requirement for extra storage and facilities to be added on, and as I said, the labour element of it, like, it makes an awful lot of sense to just work very hard on improving what you have, and you'll probably make more than what you're going to make even long term doing anything else in terms of extra numbers or anything.
Yeah, and look, I suppose, I suppose at the back to the Open this year, I suppose there was something jumped off the board to people too, that we were saying feeding half a ton of concentrate was the target, and there was a bit of discussion around that. Is that target too low and all this kind of thing? And the reality is that in most cases where we're at currently, most people will be sort of something close to maybe 3/4 of a ton or there, but so 750 kilos. And that's fair enough. But what jumped out to me on the board is that the average producer at the moment is doing 420 kilos of solids, doing 420 kilos of solids off 1.1 ton of concentrate. And to me, that's a bigger question than, that's the reality. Like, we're talking about a target of maybe close to half a ton. But to me, the bigger question for the industry is more, how are we feeding 1.1 tons of concentrate and getting 420 kilos of milk solids as an average? That's a bigger issue for people than what we write on the board as a target. And that's slightly concerning to me, that, the margin on that, at that level of concentrate, there are probably farms, and them that are at that level of concentrate, they're probably doing up to 40 kilos of milk solids for 1.1 ton of concentrate, and it's probably profitable at that level. But the worry to me is that, are we just going to sort of drift into a situation where we only discuss the marginal value of extra concentrate rather than looking at the marginal value of extra tonnage grown and extra tonnage utilized? Because that's the concern you'd have as we drift, as we move, into a more settled situation.
I suppose then, Joe, this is the $64 million one now for you. Like, you're talking about the average herds, and definitely there's big variation even across the crops in terms of that average. Like, and I do scratch my head from time to time wondering how people are actually getting by nearly with the level of solids that's been produced. Maybe when you see, obviously, if that's the average, there's half of the suppliers in that crop are above that, and then there's half that are below that. Like, so, if you're one of the ones now where you're feeding maybe the 3/4 of a ton to a ton type feeding rate currently, doing a lot of the things right from a grass management point of view, knocking out your 530, 540, the risk of system drift there is
it's a good
there
point,
also. Like,
it's there also, sure, that's for sure. And again, look, I suppose for farms in that situation, you still have to look at, it's the exact same principle, or it's the exact same idea, that you still have to do your sums on the marginal benefit of what it is you're thinking of doing. So, you take, if you want to carry a few extra cows in that situation, you still have to go back and work out what is the cost carrying those extra cows relative to the value of what you think you're going to put out. So it's the same principle or the same idea. You might be just using a slightly different set of sums, but just remember, like, if you're saying, I'm going to maybe carry a few extra cows, you're still going to need somewhere around 5 tons of forage dry matter, somewhere around that. You need to be costing in for about that much, and for most people that's going to come in as silage. So you're not going to have much change out of €1,000 in extra feed costs for the forage alone for your margin cow, right? And then you put concentrate on top of that. It's at least a ton in that situation, maybe, because you're going to feed a little bit extra to every cow because you have more of them. You're probably talking another €250. So before you know where you are, the marginal cow, even on a higher performing herd, is still costing you €1,200, €1,250 in marginal feed cost, right? Then you say you put the vet and the AI on top of that, and you put a few overheads on it. you're probably up to 1,450, could be up to 1,500 euros of marginal of marginal cost per extra cow over and above what you can carry yourself. And then you make your decision then, say, well, what's the income of my cows relative to that cost, and take your labor and your overheads out of it. And if you're left with 300 euros after that, and you're happy to take 300 euros for that, then that's your own business and that's your own decision. But all we were trying to say is that I think people shouldn't walk headlong into carrying the extra cows just because they feel that they can. They should do it on the back of having done the sums on it, and do the sums and be realistic with be realistic with yourself. But we've done this sum with lots of herds. You're talking pretty much 1,200 euro as a starting point per extra cow, on feed cost per extra cow, which sounds huge, like, because you're looking at your profit monitor, right, and you're seeing, let's say you're spending 250 euros per cow on the feed cost, and you're thinking, yeah, that's fair enough. But that's the feed cost of the cows you have already. That's different than the feed cost it's going to be for the cows you're planning to carry. And I suppose if we could just get that, if we could get every farm that's thinking of doing something different or carrying extra numbers, just think about the marginal cost versus the margin revenue. And then it's up to everybody then to decide what they want to do after that. If somebody wants to milk 10 extra cows for 300 euros a cow extra, that's their own choice, within obviously the limits of nitrates and all the rest of it. But that's their own. We're not telling anyone, what's an acceptable margin. We're saying just do your sums on it before you decide to tie yourself in to a more intensive situation. That's all.
Yeah, so I think a very important point, Joe, is as we kind of said at the outset, we're kind of coming to a tricky period maybe where people have to really sit down and consider where they are at, there's we're not, as you said, we're not actually trying to dissuade people from having stock, or we're not telling people to get rid of stock, but there could be justification for getting rid of some, and also just like you could equally just as well hold the numbers that you have, but you can do a lot of things a lot better and actually make a lot of money without any investment.
Absolutely. And sure, there are farms out there that would benefit from more cows.
Yes.
And to be realistic, there are farms out there maybe that are at a different stage of development, and you'd have some sympathy for those. Typically, maybe a farm that might be maybe a younger person coming back and taking over from the parents or whatever, and the farm is at a certain scale, and now they're in a situation where maybe they're relatively lowly stocked, and in that situation they might benefit from more cows. And they need to look at that too and do their sums on that. But that's going to be up to a certain point. Then there are other farms possibly that are maybe lacking in storage, that are always under pressure for silage, that are under pressure for labour. Maybe there's 20 cows or so in a standard size herd. Maybe there's 20 cows too many. And maybe they should be selling 20. So that's what we're trying to, there's no one answer that can cover all the circumstances out there. So we're just encouraging people to take a beat, think about this stuff, do some sums, and our advisor there to help people do them sums, and get a plan together that makes sense for everybody in the business, rather than just saying, well, you know what, I could squeeze 20 more cows in here, and I can do it by renting some ground a few miles down the road. We don't want people drifting into the assumption that a few extra cows based on a notional stocking rate that it's going to be beneficial for them, because oftentimes it is. But we do have to remember there are other farms at different stages of development that might need a few extra cows to pay the bills as well, and they can't be forgotten about either.
Yeah, so I suppose I just encourage people to put in some questions there if they want to ask them, because you're very quiet normally. There's something happening. You're even stunned into silence, Joe. But I suppose it's the big emphasis that we're trying to make here, and what yourself and Padraig were trying to make at the board as well, is that there's an awful lot of room for improvement on the existing cows within the herd. And you go back to that, you say that kind of brainstorming figure that you showed at the start, there's the recent figures for 2021 calving shows, I think 67 or 8% 6-week calving right now, so we've moved up quite a lot in the last number of years.
Yeah,
still a long way off of industry target of 90, and it's all those factors that are contributing to that 420, 425 kgs of milk solids, and that people, by maybe getting rid of some of those later calving cows that have been held on to for years and years, and bringing in heifers that are going to do longer lactations, you could push up your kilos in milk solids. And as we're kind of just advocating that people try to do things better before they go getting bigger, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this is a good time of the year to have this discussion, Stuart. It's coming into a quieter time of the year, hopefully, for people. There's time to sit and think about things a little bit. You've got decisions around culling. You've got decisions now around, housing stock, and the pressure of feedstocks and the pressure of housing and slurry storage comes into some sort of focus this time of the year, because you're planning into the winter time, and you're also thinking about next spring as well, in terms of the workload of the facilities and all the rest of it. So really, I suppose what we should be asking people to do is think about, what is the right number of cows for the farm you have, and then when you have the right number of cows, have you got the best cows possible to fill those slots? Do you know what I mean? And there's time now to maybe look at that. Even your milk recording, go back and look at the lower end of the milk recording of there might be some mature cows there that are they'll be doing less than the herd average, obviously. They might only be returning you 340, 350 kilos of milk solids for the year. And you have to ask the question, are they worth renting land to be keeping them? Because, you should do your sums based on the worst of the herd, because those are the ones you're going to get rid of. Do you know what I mean? That's all we're asking people to do, is sit down, look at your figures, look at your numbers. The solutions for every farm will be somewhat different, because everyone's situation is different. But it's a legitimate question to ask, what's the right number of cows to be milking for the farm next year? And if that number is lower than what you're milking this year, maybe the solution is to sell a few.
Yeah, so they're starting to come now. So just the first, I suppose I'll take the second one first. Luke Casey is just making the point that there's a lot of uncertainty with regard to capping of cow numbers and nitrates quotas, etc. at the moment. And is that contributing to increasing stocking rates in the short term, maybe? Have you thought that?
Yeah, look, it possibly is, Luke. It possibly is, but it's I've seen it, something similar over a couple of years. I've seen some good farms sort of existing for 5 years overstocked on the assumption that they were trying to set up a second unit or something like that. And they were always living for this thing that was going to come down the line. And they ran the farm at less than the optimum stocking rate for a number of years, until they said, we probably need to adjust this again. But I do take your point on that people are maybe stacking a little bit to try and in case of in case something changes. But I would make just one maybe point to the contrary on that. It's amazing what a small percentage extra in cow numbers can do to issues with storage, issues with silage availability, issues with labour and stocking it. It could be as little as the last 5 or 6% can put the pressure on. So
that's why the phrase the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was thinking about this the other day, actually. I had reason to be thinking about this, about culling, 4 or 5 cows. And I was thinking, culling 4 or 5 cows early is the same as, it's enough silage for maybe 80 cows for a week.
It's all putting it into context.
Do you know what I mean? Like if you sold 4 or 5 culls a bit earlier in the year, they're gone before you house. Like maybe my sums are wrong, but I kind of came up with a figure in my head thinking, geez, that means that if we were under pressure for silage next spring, that's a week's feeding for 80 or 90 cows. Like.
Yeah.
Which is amazing to think about. So that's just running 4 culls down the lane a month earlier, and you're saying, well, that can have a big effect on the overall feed. But it's that kind of stuff, that we just need to get fellas thinking on a wee bit. Sorry, Stuart. Yeah.
So there's just one more question for you then, and then a very valid point, I think, which we'll make, and which will kind of sum it all up very nicely, I think. So Mike Birmingham's just asking, in terms of the break-even milk solids per cow, should that be something that people should be looking at and making their decisions on that basis?
Yeah, no question, Mike. It's a very good point, Mike. I wouldn't argue with that whatsoever, and that's why why we really need to sort of get people looking at their sort of essentially looking at a profit monitor figure, really, or looking at the figures per cow and what the cost per cow are and the output per cow is, and looking at where your break-even milk price is. There's no question about that. Very hard to make these decisions in the absence of good physical and financial data. So I would agree fully, and I know it was something that lads looked at last week with our own advisors on certain farms, and it's a sum and an issue that does need more attention. I would certainly say, yeah. Stuart,
Another question actually has just come in, Joe, and it's worth throwing it out there because I'm sure it's something that's exercising people's minds. All right, so John Cusson is just saying, is there any research done on reducing nitrogen usage and reduction on grass output, and hence the effect on stocking rate?
On reducing nitrogen?
Yeah, we'll say obviously we're looking into 10% reduction next year.
Yeah.
What's that going to do to grass growth on farms, and is there going to be an impact on stocking rate as a result of it then?
There could be, and it is a very good point. Look at the nitrogen document that's on the Teagasc website that Pat Dillon and his team put together, covers that, and Lawrence did a nice model, and Elodie did a nice job on modelling that scenario out. And certainly just a headline reduction in fertilizer nitrogen in the absence of changing anything else is the risk with that is that it's likely to lead to a deficiency or a deficit in maybe winter forage stocks, Stuart. So there is a response to nitrogen, and obviously that response is not linear, but up to the levels that's been spread, certainly there's a response to it. There's a reason the nitrogen is spread. So certainly, you're looking at the risk in. If the only thing that changes is nitrogen application rate on farms, you're likely to have lower grass growth. So the grass stock carrying capacity of farms will be dropped. And what we've seen over the years, what happens in that situation is that just creates a bigger demand for conacre and a bigger demand for buying silage on the stem, which adds cost in the system. No doubt about that. So that's really why the focus on clover has come into such sharp focus. Really, is that's a means of to at least partially offsetting the losses, the reductions in chemical end. But yeah, definitely an issue that, if your stock carrying capacity goes down, I'd say what more people will end up doing is buying more silage than reducing cow numbers. That's what will happen in the industry, unfortunately.
That's the risk, of course, yeah. But if people adapt, and obviously better use the slurry and
better use the slurry and clover will too. So for sure. But if it's the only issue, if it's the only thing that changes, sure, there's a risk. There's a big risk there. I think definitely the Pat Dillon's report and the Teagasc team report overall, that there was numerous centres involved in that. That was one of the key issues that was highlighted, actually, that if the only thing that changes is a reduction in fertilizer N, it might have it could have negative effects. You need to look at the clover in tandem with that for sure.
Yeah, so I suppose we'll be just encouraging people to not be too worried about it at the same time, that that 10% reduction is quite attainable and a lot of farms without having any major impact in reality.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean a 10%. Yeah, it doesn't mean a 10% reduction in cows. I would be taking that as it's related but a separate issue to the idea of trimming out the least productive part of the herd to make the thing a wee bit more sustainable, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And as I said, there's one point came in here, and I think it sums it all up very well. So thanks to Martin DC for it. So Martin's comment is that I think information is the key. Milk recording, grass measuring to know where you stand, and that pretty much sums up what you've spent the last 30-40 minutes talking about.
Yeah, and I would say, to add to that, it's very thanks for that, because it's a very good point. But I do think also a good handle on your cost of production is needed as well to make those decisions really come to life. Okay, and that's where we have to really get the focus back on this stuff with our clients and with our groups. It's there anyway, and it's being worked at, but it's just that it's a new angle maybe to be looking at it, that the marginal animals. Yeah.
Yes, I suppose the final thing then, Joe, is if something isn't broken, don't go trying to fix it, basically, isn't it? If you're running a good operation, don't go messing at it.
We sort of said it almost in jest, but in half serious as well, Stuart, on the board at the Open Days, that boredom is a danger in dairy farming. I know, because some people I know that have really done a great job over the years. They've worked damn hard to get the thing into a situation where it runs very, very well, and everything is just nice and humming, and the thing runs really well. But there's always a natural inclination and a natural curiosity for people to want to change and improve something, or increase the scale of it, or change something for the sake of changing it. All we're saying is, do your sums before changing something to see what happens. Your sums will tell you a lot. Okay, I better go, Stuart.
Yeah, very good. So thanks a million,
Okay.
Joe, and thanks to everyone for tuning in today. And we'll be back next week. We'll be starting our focus on drying off over the next number of weeks. So I look forward to seeing you then. And in the meantime, stay safe. Thanks very much.
That's all for this week's Let's Talk Dairy webinar series. And don't forget to look out for more bonus episodes each week. I'll be back with our usual Dairy Edge interview on Monday, so do listen in then. I'm Emma Louise Coffey, and thanks for listening.